You've heard of ABCs, American-born Chinese. I want to talk to you about the opposite. From the mid-19th to the mid-20th century, there were generations of these CBAs, Chinese-born Americans. And this guy, John Leighton Stewart, is a good kind of entry point. He was born in 1876 in the southern city of Hangzhou. His father was a third-generation minister. That's how the family had ended up in China as missionaries. This was the case with most CBAs. Leighton Stewart grew up as a native speaker of the local language, Wuyu, known in the West as Shanghainese. He also spoke Mandarin and, of course, English at home with his parents. In his teenage years, he was shipped off to America to have some contact and exposure to his supposed place of origin. And it was there at the age of 16 in boarding school that he became acutely aware of his foreignness in an American context. Though he spoke, the way he dressed, his mannerisms, he could never quite fit in or feel comfortable with his American classmates. Nevertheless, he stuck it out. He finished college, got married, and then immediately moved with his wife back home to China. Now, this generation was a little bit different from their parents. Leighton Stewart was a lifelong Christian, but didn't think that most of his efforts should be spent on proselytizing, on talking about the gospel and winning new converts for Christ. Instead, he thought his work should focus more on the material benefits of the Chinese people, and specifically in his case, education. So he became a teacher of ancient Greek, among other things, and made his career really as the founding president of what is now Beijing University, and was also on the board of Tsinghua University, two of the most eminent institutions of higher learning in China to this day. Though he is publicly commemorated on neither campus, a keen irony when Tsinghua recently named a residential college after an American hedge fund billionaire, Steve Schwarzman. Now, Leighton Stewart was sort of broadly supportive of China's national aspirations. He was supportive of the May 4th movement, the May 30th movement, all about China's rights vis-a-vis other countries. Leighton Stewart personally led protests against Japanese incursions into the northeast, into Manchuria, and actually spent a number of years in a Japanese jail during the war. He had broad social contacts. He could chat with the nationalist leader, Chiang Kai-shek, because they both spoke the same language and were from the same native place. And at the same time, he personally knew many communists. They had been students at his schools. He was actually close personal friends with the leftist poet, Wen Yiduo, who was assassinated by the nationalists in 1946. So it made a certain amount of sense that Leighton Stewart was appointed America's ambassador to China. Now, it was not a job that was going to be easy or that many people terribly wanted. The country was descending into civil war between the nationalist and communist parties. And Leighton Stewart's approach, more or less, was to try to cultivate ties or draw connections between Washington and the Chinese Communist Party. But that was not an approach that won him any backing or favor in D.C. or at the State Department. Leighton Stewart chose to remain in the nationalist capital of Nanjing after it fell to communist forces, again to make contact with the new government, but was recalled to Washington, D.C. He was the last American ambassador to set foot in mainland China for about 35 years. Now, back in Washington, D.C., he was blamed absurdly for losing China, as if China was anyone's to lose or to win. But while he was being blamed in D.C., he was also being reviled back in the People's Republic, where Mao wrote an entire essay named after him. It's called Goodbye, John Leighton Stewart, and the subtitle is basically Good Riddance. The idea there is that you couldn't really be both Chinese and American at the same time, and that Leighton Stewart's whole life had been a lie, and his whole career had been to do harm to China and to the Chinese people. He lived out his final years in America, a place he'd never quite felt at home, and died in 1962. His final request, written into his will, was that his body be returned to China so that he could be interred next to his wife, who predeceased him and is buried on the Beijing University campus. This was one hope of many of his that was dashed, and so his bones remained in Washington, D.C. for decades, until 2008, when a thaw and a negotiation allowed him to return. Not to be buried on the Beijing University campus, that's a bit too impolitic, but an opening was created in Hangzhou, where he is buried not far from his parents and his brother and beautiful Westlake, a kind of fitting end.